He's a knucklehead.
Knuckleheads. You knucklehead.
Knucklehead?
A knucklehead McSpagatron!
Boy, I heard he's a knucklehead.
Season 1 of The Bad Batch has officially come to a close, and a lot of people, including myself, have had some mixed feelings about the series thus far. Before the show premiered, I made some very bold predictions about how good I thought it would be. Given that Dave Filoni was working on this series, and obviously he has done some amazing work between The Clone Wars, Rebels, and The Mandalorian, knowing how well The Clone Wars Season 7 wrapped up only a year ago with the Siege of Mandalore, which was incredible, seeing how far the animation has come to this point, and knowing where the story takes place time-wise and where the galaxy is at and what sort of subject matter this series could get into. I predicted that this show would be better than any Star Wars or Marvel Disney Plus series thus far. And while I don't think it quite lived up to those expectations, it still fairly competes with the rest of those shows. I think it's better than every Marvel or Star Wars Disney Plus series except for Loki, and then I think The Mandalorian Season 2 beats out The Bad Batch Season 1 as well. But I still think it was a fairly good series. It was entertaining, it touched on some really interesting topics. A lot of people don't agree with that though, and I have some criticisms as well that I'd like to dive into. But first, let's talk about the things that were great about the series, or the things that I personally really liked. The first episode. It was awesome. It came out on May the 4th, which, as everybody knows, is Star Wars Day, and it was really cool that they released an episode of a new Star Wars TV series on that day, so we could all come together as a community and watch it and talk about it. Although that day as a whole was pretty disappointing because we were expecting a lot more, it was still really fun that we got to watch that show together. And it was a great episode. Not only was it like an hour and 14 minutes long, and we had never had an episode of a Star Wars series that long before, it was also, in my opinion, the best episode of the entire series. It started out showing us the very end of the Clone Wars, which for big Clone Wars animated series fans such as myself, it was very nostalgic getting to see that one more time. Then we get a surprise cameo by none other than one of the lead characters from the Star Wars Rebels animated series, Kanan Jarrus, or as he's referred to in this series and back when he was a Padawan, Caleb Dume. It was a little weird though, because a fully grown Freddie Prinze Jr., who voices the grown version of Kanan Jarrus in the Star Wars Rebels show, was voicing the adolescent boy Padawan version of the character in this series. Apparently his performance was actually just supposed to be like a sample track, and then they were going to go back and replace his clips with a younger actor's voice, but they liked his performance so much that they just kept it, and it is a good performance. It's just a little bit weird, but nonetheless it is really interesting to hear Freddie Prinze Jr. one more time and to see that character one more time after Rebels and to see how he escaped Order 66. We've known bits and pieces about it for some time now. We've heard Kanan share some information about what happened to Ezra and the Ghost Crew in Rebels, and there's also a comic about it, which interestingly enough, if you did not know this, Dave Filoni actually retconned a Kanan Jarrus comic in order for this story to take place. There were some details that had to be changed in order to tell the story that they wanted to tell with Kanan at the beginning of The Bad Batch. And personally, I find that very, very interesting because, first of all, it just shows that Disney and Lucasfilm have a ton of faith in Dave Filoni and his storytelling abilities, but it also shows that they're willing to go back and change canon details to tell a more interesting story, which I think is a huge deal and not enough people are talking about it, because for so long Disney has had just such a tight canon. Whether you loved it or hated it, they told us what is and is not canon and made sure that we knew what the official storyline was. But now that they're willing to change things and work around things, it shows that they're more open and more fluid. And I think it's time for them, and I have for a while, to pull a Marvel or a DC and just have many different storylines that people can choose to follow. I mean, technically fans can already choose what stories they want to follow. Nobody is stopping them. and they can make up their own headcanons, hell I do. But I think people really dislike being told what the official story is start to finish when there's just such a huge galaxy of stories that could be pieced together in so many different ways. And between how upset many people were about the prequels many years ago, how upset people were when Legends was completely wiped from canon by Disney, and now how upset a lot of people are about the sequels, I think it's best if they just gave us the stories and we got to choose what the story was overall. Or hell, they could even pull a DC or Marvel in the sense that they could do a multiverse and they could give us a variety of options that are all canon. So I think that's just a really neat pathway that could be taken, and it was really opened up by this canon event that happened in the Bad Batch. But not to get too sidetracked, going back to the actual first episode of the Bad Batch, as I mentioned, we got to see Order 66 once again. We've now seen it in Revenge of the Sith, we've seen it in the Clone Wars, we've seen it in Jedi Fallen Order, and now the Bad Batch. And to me, Order 66 is the most interesting event that takes place in the Star Wars universe. It's just so epic, yet so tragic at the same time, and it just has such a grand scale to it. It takes place across the entire Star Wars universe and has such great implications. We see the extinction of the Jedi, we see the political collapse of the Republic, the rise of the Empire and Darth Vader, and I personally just love seeing every single perspective on this event, because every single character in the Star Wars universe had to deal with this in one way or another. So whether we're seeing it through Anakin's eyes or Obi-Wan's eyes in Revenge of the Sith, through Cal Kestis's eyes in Jedi Fallen Order when he's a young Padawan and he's watching his master die, or whether we're seeing these defective clones, the Bad Batch, see all of the other clones executing Order 66 and they're confused as to what's actually going on. It's just super compelling and super interesting to me, so I will take Order 66 in any movie, show, or game that Star Wars will give to us. I also love the concept of this show. We got to hear D. Bradley Baker voice so many clones throughout the Clone Wars, but they were all exactly the same, but had different personalities. But these clones, the Bad Batch, are actually different. They're defective. They have enhanced abilities, whether that's Wrecker being incredibly strong and big, but he's a little dim-witted, or Tech, who is very intelligent. They're all much different than your average clone, and that allows D. Bradley Baker to expand even further his vocal range and the personalities that he gives these characters. And it's also very much like an A-Team or a Suicide Squad, something like that. It's a reference to those types of shows and movies and whatnot. And this was actually a concept made by George Lucas. So even though George isn't actively making Star Wars content anymore, there are still things that he has his fingerprints on that are being made throughout Disney Star Wars. I also really liked Omega in this series. I know there are probably some people out there who aren't a fan of her as a character, find her annoying, or don't like some of the things that they did with her, but in all honesty, I thought she was the best written character in the series. They show how fragile she is in the beginning, but how willing she is to actually do things. And by the end of the first season, she's doing more than the actual Bad Batch to get them out of some sticky situations. So it's really, really cool. I like the fact that she is the only clone that is 100% Jango Fett other than Boba Fett. I find that really interesting, and I know there are some fans who are upset, like, oh, how could there be a 100% even though she's a girl? It's Star Wars. You know, there's a lot of scientific inaccuracies, and science is much more advanced in Star Wars, so I'm down for it. I'm interested to see if Boba and Omega ever have an interaction and what that would be like. I also really like that Omega is actually technically older than the Bad Batch that was revealed in the last episode, the season finale, and I just find that to be a really weird, intriguing, and very Star Wars detail, that she's this little kid who's following around all of these adult, badass clone warriors, and yet she's technically their older sister. She watched them being created in the lab, so I just thought that was really cool. Of course, we got some other really cool cameos in this show as well, outside of Kanan, who I mentioned earlier. We got to see Captain Rex, who in my opinion is by far the best clone character in Star Wars, better than all of the Bad Batch, better than Boba Fett, and even better than Jango Fett, in my personal opinion. He was just given so much depth in the Clone Wars, and he had such good relationships with characters like Ahsoka and Anakin, and I just love Rex to death. And he was in one of the really interesting episodes of the series, one of the best in my personal opinion. In that episode, if you can't recall, Wrecker's inhibitor chip to execute Order 66 goes off a little bit and it's starting to activate, and he's going after Omega and Rex and the Bad Batch in this weird abandoned facility, and they're getting closed off from each other, and it's pretty scary given how big and strong Wrecker is. And he's saying that good soldiers follow orders, and that's not what they're doing, so he has to take them out and whatnot. And with Rex's cameo and that whole premise of Wrecker trying to go after his brothers like that, I really enjoyed that episode a lot. And of course, in the very next episode, we got what was, in my opinion, the highlight of the entire series, the return of the legendary bounty hunter from the Clone Wars, Cad Bane. There have been debates and speculation for years now as to whether or not Cad Bane was actually alive, because there was a deleted scene from the Clone Wars where it shows Cad Bane and Boba Fett getting into a draw. Cad Bane gets shot and it looks like he's dead, but then it cuts off from there, and a lot of people thought it was canon even though it was deleted, but turns out Cad Bane, he's back in the Bad Batch. Interestingly enough though, that scene may still be canon because apparently now Cad Bane has this metal plating on his head, which is where he was shot from Boba Fett in that small deleted sequence that you can go and look up on YouTube. So it'll be interesting to see if there are any more interactions between Cad Bane and Boba Fett, whether that's in the Bad Batch or in possibly the Book of Boba Fett, the very next series that is coming out after the Bad Batch. I personally don't equate Cad Bane coming back to an actual character revival in the same way that Emperor Palpatine, Darth Maul, and Boba Fett were brought back to life, and so I don't think that makes death any less meaningful in Star Wars, even though the Emperor coming back really did a number to that whole thing. And I'm still hoping that Mace Windu comes back, because we definitely need at least one hero revival, and I think that's the one. But nonetheless, Cad Bane, not a character revival, just a character who never died, in my opinion. But I also adored that scene where Cad Bane came back, because I wasn't expecting that at all. I was thinking of so many different characters that could have shown up, good and bad, and he wasn't on my mind at all. The way they did it was like this big reveal. It was similar to Luke Skywalker coming back in The Mandalorian. Obviously not as big of a deal, but it was also kind of like a WWE superstar returning when you think they're injured or they're out or they've been gone. That's what I equated the Luke Skywalker return to, and that's just always been something that I've loved so much, is when WWE superstars come back and you're just completely blown away. That's kind of like what this scene was with Cad Bane. He has a new outfit which looked super badass and super western. The music that the Kiner brothers made for that scene was amazing. It was very reminiscent of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, which Cad Bane is actually based off of a character from that movie, Angel Eyes, the character that Lee Van Cleef plays. So that was very, very cool, and the music throughout the series actually has been amazing. Throughout the good and the bad parts of this series, the music has been a major consistency, much like with the Skywalker saga, and John Williams just always nails it. The Kiner brothers have always nailed it. But, and then finally the duel, or the draw in that scene, oh my god, it was amazing. The dialogue was awesome, it was so western, it was so cool, and I'm glad that they had the bad guy win, because of course the good guys can't always win, and I'm glad that Star Wars doesn't fall into that pitfall as much as a lot of other major franchises, so I just love that very much. Cad Bane coming back has been the highlight of the Bad Batch thus far for me, personally. We got a couple other cameos in this series as well. Of course, Fennec Shand, who is a bounty hunter that was introduced to us in The Mandalorian, and she will also be in the Book of Boba Fett, so I'm interested to see if anything that happened in the Bad Batch will tie with the Book of Boba Fett. And then we also got a couple episodes dedicated to the planet of Ryloth, and we got to see a child Hera Syndulla along with Chopper, who are from Star Wars Rebels, and I was hoping that we would see her run into a young Kanan Jarrus, of course, because we saw him at the beginning of this series, but that didn't happen. I'm holding out hope that it will happen possibly in Season 2, which I'm really excited that we got a Season 2 of this show. I wasn't necessarily expecting it, and I'm not a huge fan of The Bad Batch, but I like it, I watch it, it's Star Wars, and so I'm excited for that. Now, one last notable thing about this series that I really liked, or has me really excited before I get into my criticisms, actually has to do with the season finale. And there were a lot of people that had a problem with the season finale, including myself, but there is a newfound detail or speculation about it that definitely opens up some doors and some possibilities and has me a lot more intrigued than when I finished that episode a few days ago. At the very end of the episode, there's a scene that is setting up Season 2 for us and showing us what's to come. At first, I didn't really think anything of it or find it that interesting. All it shows is Imperial ships flying to this mountain Imperial base, and we see Nala Se, the cloner from Kamino, get off, and it seems like the Empire is going to be using her cloning talents. At first, fans thought that this intertwined with The Mandalorian and with The Rise of Skywalker. We saw little bits of cloning stuff in The Mandalorian and some foreshadowing at Palpatine possibly creating Snoke, and of course there was the whole ordeal with Dr. Pershing, which, by the way, there's a character in this final scene in The Bad Batch that wears the exact same outfit that Dr. Pershing wore in The Mandalorian. And with regards to The Rise of Skywalker, ever since that movie came out, Disney and Lucasfilm have been pumping out Star Wars content to try and fix the holes that that mess created. Even Darth Vader comics, which are set during the original trilogy era now, are making efforts to try and tie into The Rise of Skywalker or set it up or set Palpatine's return up, and a lot of fans are just really upset about it. So when this thing happened with The Bad Batch, there were some fans who were a little upset. They were saying, man, now this Bad Batch show that I like is trying to tie in with this Rise of Skywalker movie. Can't they just accept their mistakes and the things that they did and move on and just give us new, completely unrelated Star Wars content? But now we have some new information, and it's just a theory as of right now. There's nothing stone cold fact about it as of me making this video right now. But this theory could change all of that. Many fans believe that that mountain Imperial base that Nala Se was taken to at the end of that episode was actually none other than Mount Tantiss. Now, I'm not a huge EU Legends expert. I will link down below a Wookieepedia page about Mount Tantiss, but that is from the Thrawn Trilogy. It's from Heir to the Empire, and if you don't know, the Thrawn Trilogy is a set of sequel books before Disney bought Star Wars and wiped all that from canon, and they were very beloved books. Like, not even just people who hate the current sequels so they decide to like those books. Way before the sequels ever came out, a lot of people really enjoyed that story, and so many fans are now thinking that Dave Filoni is trying to set up a canon version of Heir to the Empire to give to us before the new Disney sequels actually occur in the timeline. We know that Dave Filoni is giving us a story post Return of the Jedi, pre The Force Awakens, with the original trilogy heroes when they were younger, which is something that basically every Star Wars fan in the world wants to see. And it won't just be the heroes like Luke, Han, Leia, Lando, and Chewie. It'll be villains as well, such as Boba Fett, who has been resurrected under Disney, which I'm so happy about. And as I mentioned earlier, he is getting his own spin-off series, which is coming out here in a couple months. We will also see characters from the Clone Wars. I mean, we already have, such as Ahsoka and Bo-Katan, who have been in The Mandalorian. Ahsoka is getting her own show, where the plot that has been released to us is she is going to find Rebels character Ezra Bridger along with another Rebels character, Sabine Wren, and it is more than likely that Ezra is with or knows the whereabouts of Grand Admiral Thrawn, who originally comes from Legends, as I mentioned earlier, the Thrawn Trilogy, way before Disney. So characters from all over the place are coming together in this post-Return of the Jedi timeline to set up something big, sort of like a new version of the sequels. I mean, it'll still canonically be in the same timeline as Disney sequels, but it's something that will sort of satisfy all fans, and they're intertwining these with multiple shows, and it's been rumored that it'll lead up to a big cinematic event, but currently it's been dubbed the Filoniverse because Dave Filoni is involved with basically every single one of these post-Return of the Jedi shows. But now that we know that he's possibly pulling from Legend stuff, and more specifically Heir to the Empire, it really opens up a lot of possibilities and really intrigues me. They actually already have incorporated some things from Legends into this post-Return of the Jedi era. We've seen HK droids, and Ahsoka told Din Djarin and Grogu about the planet Tython, both of which were officially Legends before they recanonized those things. But I feel like recanonizing Mount Tantiss, which again, this is just a theory, is a much bigger deal than recanonizing a droid or a planet from the Old Republic days, because everybody knows Mount Tantiss from Heir to the Empire and the Thrawn Trilogy, which takes place again post-Return of the Jedi, which is the same era that they're really setting up right now. So this could be a sign for what's to come. Dave Filoni would have to make a lot of changes so that this version of the Thrawn Trilogy could fit in with current canon, but I trust Dave. I know that he knows what the fans want and what is true to Star Wars, what's true to George Lucas. He was George Lucas's apprentice after all, and in my personal opinion, he is pretty much the only person who has made good content under Disney Star Wars. I mean, I really like Rogue One as well, but really outside of that, everything that is good that's come from Disney Star Wars has had Dave Filoni involved in some way or another. So I trust Dave, and I hope it is true that he's setting up some sort of Disney version of Heir to the Empire. Okay, now that I'm done rambling on about that, let's get back to The Bad Batch, in case anyone forgot that that's what this video is actually about. So my criticisms about The Bad Batch. First and foremost, I think Dave Filoni, as much as I love him, does not know how to write filler at all. Much like dialogue is George Lucas's Achilles heel, filler is Dave Filoni's, and I think he can work on that and get better at that. When he touches the main narrative beats and the things that are really compelling for the overall story, he is fantastic. But when it comes to just an episode that we need to fill and maybe give the characters a little bit of growth, but it's mainly just fun, he doesn't know what he's doing, in my opinion. It is really hard to sit through some of the filler episodes in The Bad Batch, which is kind of like every other episode or every 2 episodes, and so it's not great when there's Bad Batch filler. Now, the next thing that I want to bring up isn't so much a criticism as it is just something that I noticed when watching this series. If you compare the 4 shows that Dave Filoni has worked on with Star Wars, you have The Clone Wars, Rebels, Bad Batch, and The Mandalorian. 2 of those are very Force-centric and have a lot to do with Jedi and Sith, and 2 of those are much more so the gritty side of the Star Wars universe. You have bounty hunters, clones, the scum, the gangsters, things like that. And I think it is clear as day that Dave Filoni is much better when he is writing about Jedi, Sith, and the Force, which at the end of the day, for most people at least, is the most compelling aspect of Star Wars. So while I like The Bad Batch, I think after this, Dave Filoni should really stick to his guns and write more about Jedi, Sith, and Force, and let these other sort of underbelly stories that have to do with people more like Boba Fett and Han Solo and whatnot, I think he should let other writers take those types of stories. Another problem that I have with this series is the Bad Batch themselves as characters. I love the concepts, I love the way they look, I love their defective enhancements. The voice acting by D. Bradley Baker is fantastic, and the personality that he gives them, but writing-wise, they don't really change at all throughout this series, and for a 16 episode season, you kinda have to have that. Something that I expected to happen in this season is Hunter to be very stern and say no a lot, we're not doing this, and over time learn to have more faith in Omega specifically because she is a child, and at first he was sort of looking after her. But every time there was a conflict and he was trying to be a leader and make the decision that he thought was smartest, he got pushed around. He would say no, then Wrecker or Tech or Omega or Echo or whatever would say like one thing to him, and then he'd be like, okay, let's go. And that really got under my skin. And basically every other character with the Bad Batch was the same way. Their personality stayed the same and they didn't go through any real growth or change. The Bad Batch actually neglected Echo a lot writing-wise in this season, which really got under my skin. And like I said, I love the concepts of these characters and just about everything about them, except for the actual writing. I mentioned earlier, I think Omega is the best written character in this series so far, and I truly mean that. And then my last criticism, or my last notable criticism anyways, is the finale. The finale, a lot of people were upset because nothing crazy happened, like no Mandalorian Luke Skywalker appearance. I didn't need anything on that level at all. My problem with it is that there was no sense of resolution or a sense of anticipation for what's coming next. Nobody died in this series finale, which I mean is a good thing, but also if they did, then it would be more impactful than how we're feeling now. Crosshair didn't rejoin with the Bad Batch, he's still with the Empire, even though they're sort of on better terms now. We assumed that Crosshair would get back with them, or that he would die trying to save their lives or something like that, but nope, they're just still not together. And there was no real sense of anticipation after the episode. As I mentioned, there's that whole Mount Tantiss thing now, which could change that a little bit, but that's more so for the post-Return of the Jedi era, so I don't really see how that would intrigue me a whole lot with the Bad Batch. But that episode concluded basically like any other Bad Batch episode. They get into some trouble, they survive, and split ways with Crosshair. It's like the same thing over and over again. Somebody mentioned that if they ended the season with the episode before where Camino gets completely blown up, then that would have been a lot more impactful and would have had us wanting more in season 2. And I completely agree with that. They probably should have ended with the episode before. All in all, guys, I like the Bad Batch. I don't love it. It does feel like a continuation of the Clone Wars, so I do feel some nostalgia towards it because I love the Clone Wars so much. And there are some really high highs in this show, but every single time it pulls me in, I feel like it pushes me back out. There are some missteps here and there. I'm hoping for a better season 2, and actually, I would say season 1 of this show is better than season 1 of The Mandalorian, The Clone Wars, or Rebels. All of those shows just continually got better as time went along, and I have no reason to believe that it won't be the same with this show. Perhaps it won't be able to reach the highs of shows like The Clone Wars because it had characters we love so much like Anakin and Obi-Wan and Yoda, but I still think there is room for improvement here. If I had to rank this show among Star Wars shows and Star Wars movies, right now it'd probably be middle to lower end of the pack. Among shows, I'd probably say 5 out of 6 if we're including the non-canon 2003 Clone Wars by Genndy Tartakovsky. I'd probably go 2008 Clone Wars, Rebels, 2003 Clone Wars, Mandalorian, Bad Batch, Resistance, and of course Bad Batch is going to be Resistance because Resistance is terrible. There isn't much that Star Wars fans can agree upon, but that is one of the very few things they can. If I had to rank the Bad Batch among the movies and the shows, I'd probably put it in what I like to call Tier 3. Tier 1 is Revenge of the Sith, the original trilogy, and the 2008 Clone Wars. Tier 2 would be Rebels, Rogue One, 2003 Clone Wars, and then Tier 3 you have Bad Batch, Force Awakens, Mandalorian, Attack of the Clones, not in that order specifically. But that's about it for today, guys. Thanks so much for checking out the video. I have no idea how a review about the Bad Batch lasted almost a half an hour. I expected this to be like 10 to 12 minutes, but I guess I had a lot to say, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I will catch you guys next time.